Good morning. My name is Paul Joskow, and I'm going to speak for several minutes about U.S. electricity markets and the handbook on electricity markets, which will be published later this year. Let me start with this picture of the United States and Canada. I put the both together because Canada and the U.S. have integrated synchronized electric power systems, except for Quebec, and they operate from a electrical and reliability perspective together. You'll notice the U.S. market, the U.S. system has a mixed industry structure. And I divide the structure into three categories. The first are the restructured and organized markets, where there's been vertical separation, and organized wholesale markets have developed, and that would be here, New England, PJM, Texas for sure, and California, though California is a little bit different. Alberta also has such a system. The second category I would call partially restructured, along with organized wholesale markets, and those would be MISO, the Mid-Continent ISO, and Southwest ISO, where they've retained partially regulated vertically integrated utilities, which have various requirements to build or buy generating capacity, but that participate in an ISO managed organized set of markets. You can think of it, I guess, as a very sophisticated power pool from the old days, but I think the takeaway is it's an organized market, and there still is a regulatory backstop in terms of covering capital costs. Retail competition has not been a big sell in the U.S. This is just a map of the states where there is retail competition, and they're mostly in the Northeast and in Texas, which has a advanced retail competition system. And the states where it's limited are actually quite very limited. And I'm not going to talk about retail competition. I think it's more important than some people think, because in the other states where there is not retail competition, and in California where there's some retail competition, load-serving entities, primarily distribution companies, continue to have resource adequacy, long-term planning, and other obligations that they do not have in the fully restructured systems. And then there are portions of the U.S. In the West and in the Southeast where there really has been no restructuring in the grander scheme of things. They're vertically integrated utilities. They're taking more advantage of opportunities to buy and sell in the wholesale market of independent power producers. There have been proposals in the Southeast to create a formal energy imbalance market, and there is a formal energy imbalance market in the West, but there's no ISO, and the markets are not organized like the ISO markets. So let me turn to the ISO markets in the Northeast, in Texas, or ERCOT, which is about 90% of Texas, and in California. These markets, the design is, I would say, based on around models of optimal investment, optimal operations along an economic dispatch curve, and pricing for systems that are dominated by dispatchable generation. And in the handbook, my paper with Thomas Olivier Liétoir discuss that theory. And the basic design, and it's fairly similar across the ISOs, is integrated day-ahead and real-time markets for energy and ancillary services operated by the ISO. And this is different from Europe, where the day-ahead market and the real-time operations are separated. The basic principle that's used in all of these markets is a security-constrained bid-based dispatch system, yielding a bid-based dispatch, an offer-based dispatch curve, and locational marginal prices. There are price and offer caps in all of the ISO market. And there's also some form of capacity remuneration mechanism, whether it's a capacity market or as in ERCOT, use of the operating reserve demand curve to build scarcity prices under certain conditions into the energy market, or in California, where the load serving entities have resource adequacy requirements and have to contract for enough capacity to meet some kind of reserve margin target. And then behind the scenes, there are market-based hedging contracts, long-term PPAs that have emerged, both with load serving entities, but increasingly also with corporate buyers who have made commitments to decarbonize their systems. And those would be companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple and Walmart and others. Frank Woloch's paper in the handbook discusses wholesale market design in general, and he's also quite expert on the California market. Bill Hogan's chapter discusses PJM, and Ross Baldick et al. Discusses ERCOT. But I want to remind people their paper was written before the blackouts in February 2021, although it's quite an interesting chapter because they get into some of what I'll call the Texas ideology in politics, which is something I think you've all been reading about recently. The ISOs also have transmission planning responsibilities, and I think this is a somewhat less happy story. Those responsibilities have gradually changed over time. First, they were just supposed to plan to deal with reliability issues and identify transmission upgrades that were needed for reliability purposes. Then the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission allowed and encouraged them to take market efficiency into account. That meant transmission enhancements that would reduce congestion by enough to more than pay for the transmission investment. Then more recently, there's an effort to encourage interregional transmission. That means transmission between ISOs and between wholesale planning areas, which include portions of the whole country. More recently, there's been a push towards competitive procurement systems, and merchant generators are starting to come into the market. I think not with the under a system which was originally contemplated 20 years ago, but adopting the U.S. natural gas pipeline model, which is based on long-term delivery contracts with shippers or with generators, and integrating those systems has been challenging. Current issues, I think in the U.S. and elsewhere, which is the second part of the handbook. Wholesale markets are adapting or trying to adapt to integrate deep penetration of intermittent wind and solar generation plus storage. And here I think new models are required. The traditional Boiture-Turvey model turned into a bid-based rather than a marginal cost-based model really doesn't work when you have a lot of intermittent generation. And wholesale markets are going to have to adapt to that. Investment to meet deep decarbonization commitments is now a bigger challenge, especially in the absence in the US of any coherent national climate policy and limited use of carbon prices in the US. In the future, the distribution of wholesale prices is going to change rather dramatically, with many more hours of zero and very low prices and a few hours of very high prices. And this is going to affect the generation of quasi rents that are going to help to pay for capital, and that's going to be a bigger challenge even than it is now. On top of that, state governments and the federal government are making mandates to sign long-term contracts for wind and solar and storage, which are not market-based in any sense, but must be integrated into the markets. And then retail rate designs need to change to better link retail and wholesale prices to make demand more responsive to both high prices and low prices, to make it more flexible. And this is necessary both for efficiency reasons, but also to support decarbonization goals through electrification in transportation and in buildings. And let me conclude and come back to transmission. The best wind and solar resources in the US are not located where the bulk of the legacy fossil generators are, nor where their supporting transmission infrastructure is located, nor where the load is. So in the US, the best wind resources are here in the middle of the country and offshore here, and in some locations in upstate New York and far into Maine. The best solar resources are down here in the Southwest. There are excellent wind resources off the coast of California, but it's deep. And to exploit those, the developments in floating wind turbines are going to be required. The challenge is, how do we access and fully integrate investments in new generation in wind and solar at the best sites where the costs will be lower? And the answer is, we need significant investment in transmission to access these sites and to expand the geographic market areas so that they can be better utilized and exploited. I think that is the challenge everywhere. I believe we're behind Europe on this score, but people are beginning to pay attention to it. And finally, I just note that from a resource planning perspective and modeling for reliability, the old system of forecasting peak demand and forecasting generation availability, that's really got to go out the door with systems dominated by wind and solar and storage, and increasingly weather sensitive demand as buildings in particular are electrified. And here, new probabilistic models for assessing resource adequacy and reliability are going to be necessary. A lot of progress on this has been made, especially in California, but also in PJM, but there's still a lot to do. And I look forward to questions and comments. Thank you.